In these one-on-one series of interviews that we've been having, we have tried a different approach to be conversational and not so much focus on the issues, but some of the stories that the candidates have. And our candidate in this interview, Dan Sullivan, the mayor, Dan Sullivan, I'm sure has a lot of stories to tell. Dan, I am always curious about what it was like for you growing up in Anchorage, because you were the son
Sure.
of the mayor. But I understand that you also had a big family. I mean, what was that like?
Well, first to clarify, I'm the original Dan Sullivan. Apparently, there's two of us out there, and I was here first. Darn it!
I know
That's,
it's Mayor Dan, Ohio Dan. What do you? I mean, we'll go to your family
we can get to that other one,
background, but since you brought it up, I mean, is that annoying to you?
no, not at all. Mainly because I really like the guy. He's really just a rock solid human. His wife Julie, their daughters, I know all of them, and just such very nice and very capable people. So it's hard to be angry at somebody who shares the same name when they share a lot of the same values and principles. What's interesting, though, is, of course, when he first entered the race, I think he got a lot of name recognition because of my name recognition. But now that he's spent millions of dollars on the Senate race, I may be getting more of a bump from his activities. So it's kind of interesting. It doesn't happen very often in politics where two people of the same name running in a statewide election. So it's pretty unique.
And if both of you wind up getting elected, it'll get even more confusing,
Well,
potentially.
hopefully, at that point, the dust will clear and he'll be back in D.C. doing his thing, and I'll be hopefully working to help make our state a better place.
Well, going back to growing up as the mayor's son, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I mean, my history in Alaska starts before Anchorage. I was, first year of my life was actually spent in Nenana. My dad was the U.S. Marshal out of Nenana. My mom was the U.S. Commissioner, which meant that he would arrest people, she would try them. So we had the ultimate kangaroo court, the Sullivan Court, and can you imagine my mom looking down at George and going, "What do you think, honey? 6 months for this guy?" And I'm sure the miscreant is going, "Honey, what's this honey business?" And so it was how justice was done back in the day, but certainly done fairly. The U.S. Commissioner in those days was judge, jury, coroner, justice of the peace, and of course, Dad is he's deputy U.S. Marshal. His job, of course, was to track folks down and oftentimes to escort them to Washington State or Oregon for confinement. So he was on the road quite a bit. But when I was 1 year old, my brother Tim, who's a few years older, and Jack Coghill, former lieutenant governor, his daughter, they were going to help Mom with the garbage. And in those days, you burned your garbage in a 55-gallon drum. What they didn't realize at 4 and 5 years of age was that you took the drum outside the house before you set it on fire. So they burned our house down. So at 1 year of age, we moved back to Fairbanks, which is where my mom was born and raised. So until I was 8 years old, we lived in Fairbanks. So moved to Anchorage in 1959, the year of statehood, and been there ever since. So
How old were you when your dad was mayor?
well, he was elected in 1967, so I was 16 years old. And from 1967 to 81, he was the mayor, longest serving mayor, of course, in Anchorage. And so from the time I was a junior in high school till, gosh, just about 30 years of age, he was mayor of Anchorage.
So what was that like for you?
Well, it actually, I can't think of a negative thing about it because I'm real proud of him. I mean, he really put his heart and soul into the Anchorage community. In the early days, it was a part-time job. He was the general manager for Alaska for Consolidated Freightways. At the time, Consolidated Freightways was the biggest trucking company in the country. Doesn't even exist today, amazingly enough, how life changes. But somewhere in the early 70s, it became a more of a full-time position. And then, of course, after unification in 1975, when the city and the borough combined, it then definitely became a full-time job under the new charter, which basically dictated a very strong mayoral form of government. And so from 1975 through 1981, he served under the combined entity. And in those days, and when they did the charter, that's when they put in term limits. Otherwise, I probably would have been running against him these last several campaigns. It'd be, "Dad, come on, somebody else's turn, let's go." Very popular mayor.
Well, he definitely was a character. I met him when he was older, and he seemed sort of mellow by that point. But
Pretty mellow in his later days.
so, what kind of a mayor was he like?
Well,
How would you characterize him?
I think because you're a kid and you're doing what kids do, in the early years, the stories that I get of what kind of mayor he was actually come from other people. And one of the things that he really maintained, I think, when he was working with his assembly was he always maintained that there was at least 4 assembly members who agreed with him on just about any issue, so that if he did have to veto something, he knew for sure he was veto-proof. And but he got along with everyone on either side of the aisle, I think, really well. He had a great sense of humor, twinkle in the eye. He gave you a fair chance to be upright and honest with him. If you weren't, I think you saw another side of my dad that was maybe the twinkle in the eye might have dimmed a little bit if you crossed him unnecessarily or dishonestly. But overall, I think you'd have to rate him as a really outstanding mayor, not only through unification, which was a major achievement and very hard to do, combining governments, but with Project 80s, having that vision that when oil first started flowing through the pipeline, he'd been around government enough to know that if you don't build something tangible to improve your community, legacy type projects, it'll get wasted on any number of studies or maybe projects that aren't so beneficial. So the Sullivan Arena, the Lusac Library, the Egan Center, the Performing Arts Center, all legacy projects that here we are now 30 years later still enjoying those facilities.
Sullivan name definitely well known. And the Sullivan kids now. I've met your sister a few years ago when she worked in Governor Palin's office, and now
Yes.
she is a Wasilla council member.
Yeah.
Think that she'll also eventually run for mayor?
She thought about it this last time, and I think really, she's got still a young teenage child at home, and I just think that she wants to make sure that he gets through his last few years of school on the right track, and so I think that was a decision that was probably the wise decision. But and that just kind of runs in the family. My grandmother, Viola, was the first woman mayor in Alaska history. She was the mayor of Valdez back in the 1930s, and so my grandmother, my father, myself, it just kind of goes along with when you love where you live, you want to give back in terms of public service, and so it's kind of been a nice continuum.
Well, your sister, Colleen Sullivan Leonard, when we talked about you, she said, well, I'm the nicer Sullivan. So what did you do to her as a kid growing up?
Well, she's only nicer because she was born on my birthday, so she got that basically inherited birthday bounce that you get when you're born on the same day as your brother. So I was 8 years old, I was supposed to get a bicycle, got a sister, and pretty good deal.
So
overall.
how many kids in all in your family?
Nine kids, 7 boys, 2 girls. Amazing group of folks. My mom was, maybe 4'11", maybe 5 feet on a day where she wore high shoes, and to raise 7 rowdy boys and a couple girls in the mix, quite an accomplishment. And we were a one-earner family with 9 kids. I think we'd be classified today certainly as lower middle income, maybe even by today's standards. What they define poverty now as. I mean, there were no big screen TVs and cell phones, 1-car family, no garage, a mom taking care of the kids and dad working. So it was, but we had so much fun as kids because when there's that many in a household, you entertain yourself. You find games to play, or you go outside and you invent new games. And sports obviously played a big part in our lives. And I think Mom was wise enough to get us involved in sports so that we'd have something to do where she wouldn't have to manage us all day long.
So what was your sport?
I played baseball as a young kid, and then when I was about 5th or 6th grade, I became a basketball Jones, and basically was very, very passionate about the game, played all through high school and college. I was the captain of the West High basketball team in 1969, and I was the captain of the very first UAA basketball team back in the 71-72 season. We started the program, we were called the UAA Sourdoughs in those days. It was before they changed the name to the Seawolves.
So I guess the fact that you mentioned baseball, softball doesn't surprise me, because I guess I always think of you as kind of the hardball politician.
That's an interesting concept.
But I mean, you play hardball with the unions. I just have to wonder where you got that sort of pugilist politician quality.
Well, see, I don't even think of it as playing hardball. What I think of it is, if you're doing the right thing, then you move forward with it. And I don't think of it as particularly playing hardball. I just think, if you are committed to making sure that your city's on good financial shape, and you've got a path forward where you know that doing certain things are going to accomplish that, then you move forward and you do so resolutely. You can't make change by being timid. So I don't know if I'd call it hardball. I think it's just really having strong convictions and acting on them.
So 9 kids in a family, that has to be contentious at times.
Oh yeah, I think our neighbors called us the Fighting Sullivans because at least amongst the older boys, always fighting over something, new toy, um, um, a slight of some kind that escalated into a little bit more. That's just dynamics of a big family. It was great.
So I guess you could see that carrying over into your political life, being a fighter.
Well, maybe so.
I mean, politics is the art of fighting over
Yeah.
things.
Well, I mean, in a big family, I think you learn to stand up for yourself. There's no doubt about that. But again, in politics, it's really, to me, more about rather than a dynamic with other people, your philosophy. And if you really believe in something, are you willing to be committed to making change that you feel is necessary? And so, and I guess your analogy is good. You do have to fight for change. If you truly do believe that things have to be done necessarily, then you fight for it. So yeah, I'll buy that.
Well, you've been in the public eye so much. There's, probably we think that there's nothing that we don't know about you. But is there something that we don't know about you that we would be surprised to find out?
Well, I've been asked this question before. I remember my first run for mayor, Jason Moore was doing a forum debate with Eric Croft and myself. And as I told Jason, what people probably don't realize is I'm really funny.
Now, Jason at that point was a reporter for KTVA.
Yes.
But so people don't realize that you're funny?
I'm really funny.
Sometimes people who think they're funny are not so funny.
Oh, no, I'm really funny.
So give us an example of
so
your sense of humor, or it just has to pop up.
It's spontaneous. Yeah, I like quipping back to folks, just spontaneous repartee, and but because I take my job seriously, people oftentimes don't see that side of many politicians, in fact, because the image they get is what is seen on media or maybe written about in an article. And so you really have to sit down with somebody and get to know them in a social setting, and then you start to realize there's another side to the people that you think you know.
Well, there's the public side and the private side, and I suppose that humor helps.
Absolutely.
Can you give an example of when you've used it to your advantage?
Oh, not to an advantage so much. I do like, again, quick repartee to, maybe give that quick little needle to somebody. I like, for example, when I greet many groups that come into Anchorage, whether it's conventions or different meetings, business meetings of some kind, and I always try and open it up with something humorous, just to kind of, these people are sometimes in very serious meetings, and it's nice to lighten the mood a little bit sometimes.
So where did you discover your talent for humor?
I think it's a defense mechanism. When you grow up in a large family, I mean, can't fight all the time. Sometimes you have to maybe laugh your way out of a situation, and little humor. Nobody wants to fight when you're laughing. So.
Well, one question that I've asked all the candidates is, was there ever a difficulty in your life, something very, very challenging that you faced, and if so, how did you work through it?
That's a great question. I think really the most difficult thing in my life has been the passing of my parents. They both had kind of lingering illnesses, and to have to see people that you love so much suffer and go through the final stages of their life, particularly when they've been such a great inspiration, that's probably been the most difficult challenge, really. There's been other minor challenges in life, but there's nothing like the challenge of losing your loved ones, and again, especially parents that, again, were so influential. I think you learn something from it. Certainly the cycle of life is that, your parents pass on, and then you're the older generation, and it's just the way of things, but that doesn't make it any easier.
So how did you work through it?
Life goes on. One of the things that maintains you is your own family. I have the most wonderful wife in the entire world. My wife, Lynette, we will be married 30 years next year. And she's just literally one of God's angels on earth. She's born and raised in Hawaii, moved up here in the mid-'70s, and she's just absolutely stalwart. She's been a kindergarten teacher for many years, just retired from the school district, and she just glows with a positive energy that can get people around her, can change your mood, can change your whole thought process if you're down and out. So I think that's really been the main source of helping me get through a lot of things.
Well, we are an aging society, and I remember talking with your father years ago about the importance of putting resources into the Anchorage Senior Center because he said more and more Alaskans are retiring. They're not snowbirds so
Exactly
much
right.
anymore.
Yep.
And so did your father's long illness, your mother's illness, did they give you any awarenesses
Well,
that inform you today?
Well, it certainly highlights the fact that families need to take care of families. In other societies, particularly maybe in the Asian culture, the younger people having the elders live with them, and you have that continuum of care where they took care of you when you were young, and as they age and maybe become more infirm, the family takes care of their own elders. And I think our society does not do that as well as other societies, and it really drove home the point that we need to incorporate more of that into our lives. We were able to, with both mom and dad, keep them at home through most of their illnesses, and with my brother Tim as the full-time caregiver, and all of us over literally every day. And in hindsight, it's like, I saw my folks literally every day during the last couple of years of their life, and it just reminds you that should have been doing that even for more years and even earlier, because our elders are our treasures.
And of course, as they get in that last phase, they're not as clear, their memories are not as strong, but I guess it just reinforces that life goes by quickly.
Yep.
And this campaign is going by quickly.
Oh my gosh, we're less than 2 weeks now.
Well, the one thing that I think this campaign will be remembered for is that in the very beginning, it seemed that your ticket, the Parnell Sullivan ticket, was considered pretty much a shoo-in because there were two other sets of candidates in the running and they merged. And now in the polls, it looks like your ticket is running behind.
That depends on which poll you look at. We've got several that show us up 5 points. There's ones that show us down, and there's ones that show us exactly right in the middle. So.
But how do you feel about that? That at once, you kind of felt that it was going to be an easy cruise to office, and now it looks like you're going to go through some rough roads in that final stretch.
Yeah, I've never felt like it's easy. I always run, every campaign I've run, and I've run, this is actually the combined campaign now, is the 7th campaign. I always run like I'm behind, because in politics anything can happen, and often does. So you never get that mindset that this is going to be easier or a cruise. And as we've seen, with the new combined ticket, who would have anticipated that a couple of months ago, with the Democrats not even having a candidate on the ballot? I mean, that's a huge step back for the Democratic Party. I wonder about that, but bottom line is you just have to fight harder, you have to get out more, you have to make sure that you meet as many people as you can and get your message across. I've been all over the state, so it's an opportunity to not particularly talk to people, but to listen to people. And each region of the state is so unique and has their own challenges that my job as a lieutenant governor candidate has really been going on listening tours rather than spouting my philosophy or what I think should be done.
So what comes to the top in all your listening tours?
There's a couple things that rise in every area of the state, and energy is number one. Every area has got challenges, whether it's interior with their lack of, in an urban setting, cheap, affordable energy. And then just when we think that that's a challenge, you look at rural Alaska and what they're paying for heating oil and the challenges they have even with deliverability of fuel oil. Alaska Energy Authority has actually done a pretty good job of mapping out around the state what the potentials are, whether it's river hydro or wind. Or, and now a new tidal prospect in False Pass has just been announced, and they've got huge tidal activity there. It could be a real boon for that area. So I think that's one of the main things we have to focus on, because a community can't survive without affordable energy.
And I know that for you, that's been a major push as mayor, is trying to get Cook Inlet gas to Anchorage and make sure that it keeps flowing.
Yeah, for 40 years, South Central Alaska had the cheapest gas in the entire nation. I mean, how blessed were we to, literally right outside our door in Cook Inlet, a huge supply of natural gas. Without that affordable, available natural gas, Anchorage would not be the city it is today. It's, affordable energy is the key to economic growth. And that's why you won't see these other regions of the state achieve economic growth unless we can solve their energy dilemma.
Well, the Walker-Malott ticket has focused a lot on energy, and Bill Walker has criticized Parnell's approach to developing natural gas in Alaska.
Sure.
So what role would you play in the administration? You know, if Governor Parnell is reelected,
Yeah.
how would your energy expertise be utilized, do you think?
Well, to be determined, obviously, but one thing about Mr. Walker, and by the way, Bill Walker's a friend. His wife Donna and my wife actually went to the same high school in Hawaii at the same time together. Knew each other, but weren't best friends. But
And you have that Valdez history
we got the
in your
Valdez
family?
history together, yeah. So I have no ill will certainly towards Bill Walker and Byron Malott, and I have known each other many, many years, and I have a great deal of respect for Byron and all he's accomplished. So it's, in my mind, really boils down to issues and accomplishments. Bill's been working on a gas line for 30 years. What's been the result? There's been no result.
But you know, you have to give him credit. Is many, many years ago, he was fighting for LNG, liquefied
Sure.
natural gas, and people ignored him.
Yes.
He was like Don Quixote
Yeah,
fighting
well,
windmills,
was
and now
probably-
look at what happened.
Sure, I mean, everything goes full circle, but the problem is 20, 30, even 10 years ago, you could not offtake gas from the North Slope. The Alaska Oil and Gas Conservation Commission would not allow gas offtake because it's so valuable producing oil. So where was that gas going to come from 10, 15, 20 years ago for a gas pipeline? It didn't exist. It's only now that the AOGCC has actually given indication that there can be offtake, particularly with Point Thompson coming on board, which, by the way, Bill Walker's suing to stop Point Thompson. Big mistake. So, you know, we've made historic progress. The governor has done an amazing job moving a gas pipeline forward. I hope my role would be, you know, when you're lieutenant governor, you're part of the cabinet. You're sitting at that table when policy's being decided and
Well,
formulated.
sometimes.
Well-
Some lieutenant governors have,
Yeah.
have been asked to stay out of the way. Thank you very
I
much.
suppose that's true. I suppose that is true. But we've seen examples where it works the other way. I know Tony Knowles and Fran Ulmer worked really well together. I think Wally Hickle and Jack Coghill worked really well together.
Well, maybe in the beginning.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, building relationships is not the easiest thing, but Governor Parnell and I, my time as mayor has kind of paralleled his time as governor. So we've had the opportunity to work together on a lot of issues, capital projects for South Central, and I've gotten to know himself, his commissioners, the deputy commissioner. So I've got a relationship already established with the administration, and it's a good relationship. We don't agree on everything, but so far, I mean, I think it's been a really good, solid relationship.
Well, I can see that he might utilize you for energy, but how might you make yourself useful to the governor? How do you see yourself fitting in?
Sure. Well, you know, a lot of people have suggested over the years, and this is something that should be considered. In fact, Stephen McAlpine told me this a couple of months ago. He said the lieutenant governor should also be a commissioner of one of the departments. And his suggestion was the Department of Commerce, because that way you're truly a part of the cabinet with definite responsibilities in addition to certainly running elections. And I think that might make some sense. But even in addition to that, again, as policies being set on energy issues, having that seat at the table, being able to voice based on my experiences and what's happened. Cook Inlet, for example, I mean, worked really well with the governor and the legislature on what happened in Cook Inlet. When I first got elected, I formed an energy task force comprised of, you know, some of the smartest people I could find in town to really analyze what could be done in Cook Inlet to turn this situation around. Because quite frankly, people hadn't really been talking about it, and it was getting to the point where it was getting into almost crisis mode. And so not only did we start practicing conservation measures and tabletop exercises on if there was a disruption, who would be responsible for what, but we started talking about how do you solve the problem. And the bills that passed in 2010, amazing, in a 90-day session, legislation to incentivize a gas storage facility in Kenai, legislation to incentivize new production, new exploration in Cook Inlet. They both passed in the 90-day session, and it's turned Cook Inlet around so dynamically that based on that experience, I just think I could be an effective voice at the table on energy. And I've got other issues as well I'd like to be involved with.
Well, one of the most important duties of the lieutenant governor is to fill in for the governor, step in should there be a crisis,
Yeah, good point.
or the governor makes a decision to leave office.
Which we've seen before. Yes,
As Sarah Palin,
Yeah.
you know, her departure underscored that the lieutenant governor is not to be just shelved away or considered, you know,
It's
second
really,
fiddle.
It's really like being the backup quarterback on a football team. You know, you look at the rosters of NFL teams, and those backup quarterbacks were really good quarterbacks in college, and you know, in many cases have proved themselves on other NFL teams. as the lieutenant governor, with the experience I've gotten as the chief executive of the largest city in Alaska, by far the largest city, 5.5 years of that experience, and what I consider to be a really good experience based on what we've been able to accomplish in Anchorage, I think I would absolutely be ready if the occasion ever arose where I had to step in and fill in for the governor, and do so capably.
Well, opponents of yours, don't really
There's opponents?
look favorably upon some of your tactics, which are characterized as hardball, unnecessarily confrontational. An example they give is AO 37.
Sure.
The assembly hammered out a compromise. You shut it down, kind of creating unnecessary friction. I know that the unions certainly wouldn't look forward to a Governor Sullivan.
No, I mean,
there's a
sure.
fear that if you should become governor, that it would be very fractious, very contentious.
Well, see, that's a bit of a misnomer, because let's look at the facts. Number one, the Assembly has done several things since AO 37 passed. They put forth a version that you referred to it as a compromise, but it completely gutted AO 37. It was unacceptable. And then they jockeyed over which states to have the referendum election on, and my feeling was, if it's an issue that is that important to our community, why not have it when you actually get voter turnout? And there's a book by a Berkeley professor that talks about when you have small turnout elections, how special interest groups can dominate those elections. So having it in April, when there is a guaranteed small turnout, basically allows a special interest group like the unions to dominate the discussion.
But they've also accused you of trying to manipulate the election process with scheduling elections to your advantage.
Well, again, it's not to my advantage, it's to the community's advantage. An issue this important should be decided by as large a group of the community as possible, and you get that in November elections. You don't get that in April elections. But let me just point out one other thing that I think is a bit misunderstood. We have now signed 7 contracts in the last 6 months with our unions. We only have 9. We've signed 7 of 9 contracts, negotiated by their leaders, ratified by their members, and the tenets of AO 37 are virtually entirely contained in every contract. So it's not the details of AO 37, it's about power. They had a lot of it under Mayor Begich. The pendulum has swung back a little bit under Mayor Sullivan. They don't like that. I understand that that's their role, especially the leadership, to amass as much power as they can. But I have to look out for the other 298,000 people in this community who pay those wages and benefits, not just the 2,000 plus folks who are the employees of the city, who, by the way, I think do a fabulous job for the most part. I've never disparaged a public employee, as some of the folks try to indicate sometimes. AO 37 had more public process than any ordinance I've ever been involved with in 15 years of government. You had 5 assembly work sessions. Most ordinances have 1. 2 of those work sessions were exclusively with the unions, so we could get their input on the ordinance. And the ordinance changed because of their input. The version that passed was called the S2 version, which means it was the second substitute. And then 20 hours of public testimony. No ordinance has ever had that much testimony. So there was extensive public process. And the end result, basically, it's fair to the employees because the contracts that we've signed prove it, but it's fair to the people that have to pay those contracts, and that's just as important.
Just wrapping things up, what do you think was the most difficult thing for you to do as mayor?
I think really having to come into a situation where the financial health of the city was in jeopardy. Our reserve accounts, which are required by law to be at a certain level, had been stripped millions below that level. You've got rising expenses in the midst of the worst recession in 70 years. The contracts alone added $15 million a year to expense without adding a single employee at a time when your revenues are known to be falling.
And
so
as a state, we're facing that.
And that's one of the reasons that I decided to run for statewide office. I think I can bring some of that expertise that I've certainly gained in managing the city's budget, managing it so well that we've had 5 straight years of budget surpluses. We've got a AAA bond rating. My 3rd year in office, we were upgraded from a AA to a AA plus. Last year, from a AA plus to a AAA. There's only 300 plus cities in America out of 4,000 that are rated that have AAA bond ratings. We've done a fabulous job, and I say we because it's been a team effort. But that's been the biggest challenge, and quite frankly, we've done a great job of it.
Well, and finally, closing things here in our conversation, nobody can always win all of the time. Somebody has to lose in this election. So if the Parnell-Sullivan ticket goes down, what will be next for you?
Well, there's mixed blessings in that, if we're elected, when we're elected, I will actually have to resign a little bit early from the mayor's job. If we don't prevail, which I don't think is going to happen, I get to be mayor through June 30th of next year, and I love the job.
And then what?
The world is full of opportunities, and I'll look at every one of them.
All right. Well, thank you very much for sitting down and giving us some insights into your life and some of the reasons why you're running. Thanks.
Thank you, Rhonda.